All right, here we are. Well, hello everyone that is watching us. We're so glad you found us. It's Adam here again with Pastor Ralph
Hello.
for another pastor chat. This week's theme was home. And Ralph, you found home kind of like throughout the whole Bible, it looked like.
Yeah, I started with page one. I said, folks, guess what? You got to turn to page one of the Bible. I know pastors never ask you to go to page one. They always come up with page something like 500 or 800 or 1400. We started at page one, and then we went all the way to the end in Revelation.
Yep.
So it was really kind of nice. When I premise it with saying, hey, I know there's a lot of sub narratives or narratives in the Bible that are things that we can say it carries throughout. And I think finding home and really finding home with God is one of those narratives. And I basically started with, in the beginning, God created. Well, he created the earth and this world and this universe. He created it for what? He created it for us. So we would have a home, a place to live as we work out our relationship with him. And so we kind of talked about the Hebrew people from Abraham all the way up to Jacob, to Joseph, and beyond, saying, hey, there's this Abrahamic covenant and the Mosaic covenant. They were promised a land, a home, and God's working with them. That's why I think this theme of having a home is really pretty important throughout the Bible.
Yeah.
And we even talked about they're losing a home, as we get into, as they're sent off to Assyria and Babylon and they're dispersed, right? And they lose their home and they long for it, right? So I kind of compared it to when we first go away as we grow up and we have our home and we become 18, 19, 20 years old and we want to move away. And until we have to make our first meal and make our first payment, mortgage payment, and boy, it'd sure be nice to be back home with mom and dad because mom made great meals and I didn't have to buy groceries and she did my laundry for me, right?
I could burn noodles.
Yeah, they had lots of peanut butter sandwiches and
Yep.
I think they were turkey pot pies at the time. They were like 25 cents a piece, so I could get 4 of them for $1.
Nice. Yeah, and I think about especially the Old Testament story where they're trying to find their home, they're getting kicked out of their home. That wasn't just a geographical problem. That was a problem because God lived in a very specific spot. There was that temple in Jerusalem, and then there was that Holy of Holies, that inner spot, and that's where God was. And then so you lose that, you haven't just lost your physical structure.
Yeah.
You've lost your connection to God. You've lost
Your whole identity is lost, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was a struggle for him, and I think that's, like you said, is one of the reasons home is so important. I think we talked about being homesick, right?
Yeah.
And I got to the point where it basically said, well, okay, great, this is what happened in the Old Testament, and it was all about a place, and that place is where God was. But then you get into the New Testament, and it's not about a place anymore. It's finding home with God in and through Jesus Christ. And we have that indwelling of the Holy Spirit. And that indwelling or that dwelling is another home word, right? So the Spirit finds home within us. And really when Christ is talking about a home, he's not just talking about our home here in this place, but our home after this place, not in this kingdom, but in the next kingdom.
Yeah.
And so I took them basically from Revelation or from Genesis to Revelation, where God says the New Jerusalem is coming back down from heaven onto earth, and there's a new home again. God is going to be with his people. And that's really what home is about. It's being with God, it's being in relationship with God.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, I really tapped into in my sermon kind of that whole indwelling spirit and how there's just something I hear it in so many people when I talk to them, and it's true for me too, that like there's something in us that like says there's more to this, there's more to life, there's something I'm not grasping. I've got this like drive to like seek, to find, to dwell, and it's not here. It's not this right now. And I think I used the story of Odysseus from the Trojan War, and about how Odysseus goes off and he takes his army with him. He leaves his home behind, and he takes his army and he goes off and he uh, has all kinds of adventures, gets shipwrecked, fights, big magical beasts, and it has encounters with god, like Greek gods, and fights false gods, and does all this crazy stuff, and then he ends up, his whole drive in all of this is to try to get back home. And when he gets there, home's nothing like it was when he left. And I think
Years have
that,
passed. Many years have
yeah,
passed.
yeah, couple decades.
Yep.
And you know, I think the kind of one of the takeaways that you can have when you look at that is, there's this drive for home that points us to where we came from and where we're going, and the gift is discovering that it's right here with us, regardless of geographically we go, regardless
With
of
that indwelling of the Holy Spirit, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I like that Richard Rohr kind of used that homesickness to continue the conversation of moving from that first half of life
yeah,
into that second half of life, where I think is Odysseus was on those travels. I mean, he's got a firm, and here's where it is, and he needs to learn and be able to move from these are all the things that I held in belief for the first half. How do I get to the second half? And that comes in the end of his story. And
right,
even for us, that's part of our story. The first half of our life, we want these rules and these regulations, and we put God in this box. And as we grow and we get to know Him, and He points to us and tells us, "Man, I'm dwelling with you. I'm dwelling within you. And guess what? I can teach you so much more about the second half of life if you open up your heart and your mind to me and realize that I'm so much more than what you thought when you were younger."
absolutely. And I think, we have this, he quoted Teresa of Avila, who's a really great mystic, Christian mystic, and kind of says, it's that moment where we find God within us, that we realize we are also in God, and that's our great homecoming moment. And I think
Yeah.
that second, moving from that second half, from that first half to that second half of life, we find God within us, but also in our neighbor, and that these belief systems that we've created all sorts of belonging systems around, like, who's in, who's out, who belongs, who doesn't. And when we find ourselves, God within us, and we find ourselves within God, we realize that that's everybody. Everybody
Yeah.
is. And so there's, we're all just, Ramdas says, we're all just walking each other home, which I think is a beautiful, beautiful
Yeah.
picture.
I think we see that even in Genesis as God creates everything, right?
Yeah.
His DNA is in everything.
Hmm.
And we forget that. We think that we own some piece of God. And if we can keep it refined and defined and we just follow the rules
Hmm.
and we're good rule followers, then everything's going to be okay. And God's like, yeah, but look what Christ said. He said all those rules in the Torah, they're really nice, but let's just try and love God and love our neighbor. And
Hmm.
we can't even get that right. And I think if we can just start to get that right, we that moves us really from the first half of life to the second half of itself.
Right, right. And I think that's so much of what, you see, particularly like in the book of Matthew. You see these sort of, teachings that kind of come off as extreme from Jesus, where he's saying, like, the rule says this, but really it's about this. And his point is, like, you can't keep that rule no matter how hard you try. That's his whole point. Like,
Good luck.
yeah, it's not like, oh, just try harder and be better. And, it's one thing it's bad enough to, like, not murder your neighbor, but don't even be angry at him. Like, well, I fail that every day.
Yeah,
There's no keeping these rules.
yeah,
And so, at least at least from God's point of view. So the way we keep the rules is to essentially settle, in my opinion. We make these man-made, um, uh, drawing from our self as source rather than God as source, and kind of saying like, well, this is who's in, who's out. This is which side of the line you fall on. And there's a place for that. When you're younger, you've gotta learn how to behave. But at the end, you gotta realize that no matter how hard you try, you're never gonna be perfect. you're never gonna you're never going to live in such a way where all of creation is harmonized within you, and or you are in perfect harmony with all of creation. It's not going to happen.
No.
You can try, but it requires God's grace and God's mercy to get there, and the guidance of the Holy Spirit.
Correct. We need God's Spirit within us to be able to make those transitions. And really, that's what transforms us. I think we talk about it, and we kind of put most of life in a linear fashion from beginning to end, right? And we learn from beginning to end. We need to go to step 1 to step 2 to step 3. We need to go from 15 to 20 to 30 to 40. We try and put everything in linear. And I liked how you talked about it before. It's really a spiral, right? Mm-hmm. That's how things go. We kind of hit this piece, and oh boy, we latch onto this as we go up, and our spiral gets bigger. But it's just not linear. We keep moving and going around and round as life goes, as we learn and get to know God.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a really great way to put it, I think. And it's.
And I stole that from you. You know that.
It's brilliant. That's why I love it so much. That's why I think it's so great. You got it from me. But and one of the other things that really kind of stood out to me as I was going through the process of writing my sermon is there's the passage from Matthew where Jesus kind of says, there's an easy road that's really easy to travel, and it leads to a closed gate. But the hard road leads to an open gate. And I think so much of what keeps us from entering that second half of life is because the road is hard. It's not an easy road. And so as soon as things get unpredictable, as soon as things kind of grow beyond our understanding, and we're in this way of seeing life and seeing other people and seeing the world where it's like, this doesn't make sense with what I knew before. So often we just kind of fall back on that, like, well, I'm going to fall back on what I learned in Sunday school. I'm going to fall back on how mom and dad raised me. I'm going to fall back on what my community says about the best way to live. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that it doesn't lead you to that second half. You've got to go through that unknowing. You've got to go through that embracing of mystery. Go on the adventure. Take your army with you, Yeah.
That's a journey of life, right?
Yeah.
I mean, God uses life, all the trials, the tribulations, the struggles, the failures, the successes, all that to shape us, and really, I think, to draw us in to his home so that we dwell with him, right? Both in this kingdom here and now, and the kingdom in the future. It's really about abiding with God, and I just think God uses all those things really to draw us into him. That's his ultimate goal, is that we spend time and we get to know him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the most liberating things that I came to realize was that in God's economy, nothing is wasted. Everything gets used. Suffering is just grist for the mill. It's, your mistakes are the things that lead you into that next chapter of life, that closer relationship with God, finding your home. And I think that is such a I think liberating and freeing thing to realize and be able to live from.
Yeah, it takes a lot of anxiety and a lot of the stress out of life away when you get to that point as well. I think as I read in it with Rohr, he talked about most people don't get to that maybe in their early 50s.
Hmm.
But we also come across a lot of people that really have don't get there even in their 70s and 80s, right?
Right.
They're still looking for that rigid rule following, and you can tell they haven't transformed into that relationship with
Yeah.
God, that connection with God that gives them um, trust, faith,
Yeah.
hope.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the difference between being an elder and being elderly. I think they're not the
Yeah.
same thing.
No,
It the number of times you've been around the sun doesn't really mean much in terms of what you've gained from life, what kind of wisdom you've had. Sure, as experience as you live, you gain experience, and hopefully that translates into some sort of wisdom. But how have you grown? How have you? I've met folks who are in their 70s and 80s who have clear like God has so clearly been taking them on some grand adventure that I hope someday I'll be able to understand, and they're
yeah,
doing so much with them. And I've met people who at the same time, and it's got nothing to do with smarts. It has
no,
nothing to do with intelligence, how many books you've read, how many things you know, how many things you can fix. It's wisdom is such a different way of knowing and seeing the world. Um, and it I see it in people of all different ages. I've seen such profound wisdom come from kids. I've seen such profound wisdom come from people in their 20s and 30s and 40s and their 90s.
yeah.
Um, but there's a difference between being an elder and being elderly. Um, and I think the wise elders are come in a lot of different shapes and sizes and ages.
I think so too. And you're getting us into our conversation for next week.
Right? I know. Did you see what I did there?
Dang, good lead in. Ah,
Stop recording now.
yep. Oh, hit that end button.
All right.
Oh,
Well, thanks everyone for joining
oh,
Pastor Ralph and I in this conversation, and we hope you have a blessed week.
me, I hope you have a great week too. Hope you chuckle with us and learn with us and laugh with us as well. We all need a little bit of laughter.
Sure.
Blessings on your week.
All right. Take care, everyone.